former capital of the Philippines for about an hour's drive, you'll come across a rather creepy sight of this large skeletal head rising above the trees. It's what remains of a huge bust of former President Ferdinand Marcos. And it's not the only mark he's left on the city of Baguio. Take a 30-kilometer drive into town along Route 208, a road still called the Marcos Highway by many, and you'll find a complex of enormous mansions, all built during Marcos's 2 decades of rule. You can find remnants of his regime all over the Philippines. Like this huge cultural complex right here in the heart of Manila. Places like this aren't just the legacy of the Philippines' longest-serving president. They're also physical reminders of one of the world's most corrupt regimes, a sophisticated machine that stole as much as $10 billion and left the central bank's account so empty that it was basically bankrupt. This is the story of how former President Ferdinand Marcos became one of the richest and most corrupt men in Southeast Asia until it all came crashing down. This is the Big Steal. Marcos came into power on the back of a populist campaign that promised to, among other things, make the country great again. Where have you heard this before?
We'll make America great again.
The election was a combative and bitter affair that ended with his rival, former President Diosdado Macapagal, calling Marcos a murderer, as well as a thief, a swindler, a forger, and a threat to the country. You see, by 1965, young Marcos had already been tried and convicted for the murder of a political rival of his father, a small-scale strongman in his own right. He later overturned this conviction on appeal and then painted himself as a war hero. But not just any war hero, just the Philippines' most decorated war hero. A former World War II soldier who claimed to have received every single award and medal that was available at the time. In hindsight, all of this, the allegations of theft, the murder, the false claims of grandeur, seem like stark warning signs. But hindsight is 2020, and by 1965, Marcos was already in it for the long haul. He established close links to the military, declared martial law in 1972, was accused of countless human rights abuses, and began to siphon money out of state coffers while enriching his friends and allies. And he did all of this while he and his wife, First Lady Imelda Marcos, flaunted their wealth and hung out with some of the richest, most powerful, and fashionable people of the day. The couple had the houses, the jewels, and a collection of shoes that remains a thing of legend to this day. They also had the entire country's economy at their disposal and a serious addiction to funding public works projects as hallmarks to greatness, like the 88-hectare cultural center complex in the capital. Here's a gruesome story about one of the buildings, the Manila Film Center, built in record time to host A-listers at an international film festival. During construction, an entire floor collapsed onto a group of workers. But work never stopped. Allegedly, the order was given to simply build over the bodies. Such was the impunity Marcos acted with because he was allowed to. A few buildings in here have turned out to be complete white elephants, like the $25 million Manila Film Center that became a venue for screening raunchy films in the 80s. The $37 million Coconut Palace, built for the Pope's visit, but was chastised for being too opulent by the pontiff himself, who chose not to stay there. But during the time of construction, these inspiring structures were for showing the world, as Imelda puts it, a pretty face. In fact, one reason the Marcoses stayed in power for so long was because they were so good at showing pretty faces. In the 1960s, the world was locked in a Cold War, and when America looked at the developing world, it may have been thinking that a cooperative tyrant makes for a better partner than a democratic but unfriendly government. The US backed the Marcos regime for a very long time, tolerating gross human rights violations and world-class corruption. As Franklin Roosevelt puts it, he may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. From day one, Marcos too branded himself as a staunch anti-communist, winning the affections of at least 4 White House administrations. He even graced a 1966 Time magazine cover for his, quote, dynamic and selfless leadership. But towards the end of his 2 decades of rule, the tide had turned against the Marcoses from within the Philippines. 1983, the Filipino economy was in shambles. Marcos's endless borrowing had chalked up a foreign debt 4,000% greater than that before his presidency. Human rights abuses multiplied. And not only did Marcos not manage to quash the communist insurgency, its numbers have exploded in response to his regime's brutal rule. In fact, remember this statue? It looks this way today because it was blown up by, you guessed it, communist rebels. At this time, Marcos may have made a fatal error in judgment. With his iron grip on the country, it is believed he masterminded the assassination of opposition leader Benigno Aquino, giving his American backers no more reason to defend him from an incensed public. Ferdinand Marcos fell to popular revolt. Marcos died 3 years after, in exile in Hawaii, and left the nation bankrupt and paying off his debt for the next 4 decades. As for the missing billions, investigators have traced these ill-gotten gains to secret offshore accounts, shell companies, property investments, and expensive art collections in jurisdictions around the world. Several governments have outright refused to cooperate with the investigation to avoid embarrassing their politicians. As for the Marcoses, they managed to drag out the remaining court cases, hiring the best lawyers. No one, family, friend, or crony has served a prison sentence for their part in the corruption. And to many, the Marcos family remains national treasures, no pun intended.
Hey, give me directions to Findlay Honda Henderson.
Good credit, bad credit, no credit?
This is September 11 in the province of Ilocos Norte. It's a day of celebrations in honor of Ferdinand Marcos, who was born in the municipality of Sarat in 1917. To the people of this town, Marcos is still, and perhaps will forever be, a national hero.
Today, history is not done indeed with Ferdinand Marcos.
And his children are eager to reap the benefits of this popularity. His son, BONGBONG Marcos, ran for vice president in 2016 on the promise to revive a golden age of peace and progress.
I am a beneficiary of the good work that was done in my father's time. All the things like land reform, things like the electrification, things like agriculture.
He was backed by fellow candidate Rodrigo Duterte, who called Marcos a hero to many Filipinos, and eventually allowed the former president to be buried with pomp and ceremony at a hero cemetery in Manila.
Kami ay naniniwala sa aming mga sarili at puso't isipan na si dating Pangulong Ferdinand E. Marcos ay isang bayani. Siya ay nagbigay ng golden age sa bansang Pilipinas.
Many Filipinos have bought into the narrative peddled by the Marcoses, which sends a message to politicians everywhere that corruption ultimately pays. The practice of mixing politics and business has existed for centuries in Asia. At one point, such cooperation was even praised by the World Bank for greasing the wheels of growth, until it sent economies crashing down in the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Today, the practice has a name: crony capitalism, a term popularized during the Marcos era. It has also experienced a golden age in the past 2 decades, giving us a third of the world's billionaires today. When corruption is this pervasive, ultimately, it undermines any hopes of prosperity in the developing world.